You're live.
Good. Call to order. This Thursday, April 25th, Oregon City Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. Starting with introductions, to my right, Mr. Bill Daniels.
Present.
Troy Bollinger.
Derek Kugel.
Chris Cook. Karen Moy.
Lisa Novak.
Doug Neely.
Alicia Hammock.
Jeff Sargent.
Phil Lewis.
Christina Robertson Gardner.
I moved your name tag up for that.
All right, agenda approval of minutes. Agenda item 3A, minutes of March 28th, 2019. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the draft? And are there any comments? Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Item 4 on the agenda, citizen comments. Do we have any citizen comments tonight? I don't think I have a citizen. Apparently not. Item 5. Item 5A, presentation, Beaver Creek Concept Plan by Ms. Christina Robertson Gardner.
Thank you all. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Christina Robertson Gardner. I'm a senior planner. And my goal tonight is to kind of give an update and overview of the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan, our zoning and code implementation process. And kind of the reason why is all of our boards and commissions usually have some connection to, land use and development. And on this end, as PRAC and the Parks and Rec Department move forward on any future parks planning, I wanted to provide kind of a larger overview and bigger picture of what this concept plan is, and then what these code amendments are and are not doing, and kind of where it fits in the larger process. So I have probably about 25 slides. I will go over them. Feel free to interrupt me if you do have a specific question, and we'll move through them. What you have here on your dais, I provided, and these will be on, the maps are on our PowerPoint as well. These were draft maps that were created for the April 9th public meeting. So they're just hard copies, as well as a copy of the public comment board for the April 9th. And I can explain how you can stay involved and provide additional comments. There we go. So what is a concept plan and why do we create concept plans? So just to ground everybody on what concept plans are is this region has an urban growth boundary, and Metro is the regional government that controls the urban growth boundary with consultation from all 3 counties and all the cities within those 3 counties that are inside the urban growth boundary. The urban growth boundary is to provide a boundary to have at least 20 years of land supply for development. So every 5 years, Metro takes a look and say, do we have 20 years of land supply within the urban growth boundary? And then if they feel that the urban growth boundary needs to be expanded, they take a hard look of where it should go. They look at lots of different reasons: soil, transportation, infrastructure, all these criteria in the kind of the pot of the soup. Now in Oregon City in 2002, we had 3 areas that were expanded. The Park Place Concept Plan area, the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan area, and the South End Road Concept Plan area. And when you have an urban growth boundary expansion, there are some requirements, because we want to make sure that when we expand our urban growth boundary, we use our land efficiently. So we have, through this agreement of all of our communities with the urban growth boundary, that housing needs to be at a density that's sustainable for infrastructure and has kind of a sustainable use of land. So generally they're about 10 units per acre on average. So there could be areas that are a little bit higher density, areas a little bit lower. And then this area, which is partially identified for jobs, there's a specific job target. So in the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan area, went through public process kind of between 2006 and 2008 about how to look at designing a new area for Oregon City. So the concept plan takes a look at bigger picture issues. And then it's adopted to our comprehensive plan, and over time, code is amended and zoning is created for an area. So the Park Place concept plan in South End area, that process has finished. This plan was caught up in some legal action and review, but in 2016, the City Commission readopted it unanimously, and the city moved forward to look for grants to have help on creating the zoning code for the area. So big picture, what is the Beaver Creek concept plan, Beaver Creek Road concept plan area? It has an employment campus north of Loder Road, some mixed-use districts along Beaver Creek Road, generally across from the high school, 2 mixed-use residential neighborhoods, and between 1,000 and 1,600 new housing units and up to 5,000 jobs. So that is the big picture narrative of what came out of the concept plan area. This is the kind of the watercolor drawing that is adopted as part of the concept plan area. You can see the areas in light blue are the employment areas. Purple is kind of a mix of retail, employment, some multifamily. The areas in orange and yellow are more are mixed-use residential, so allowing things like multifamily and single-family residential, and some of these new equitable housing, missing middle products that are coming out of our equitable housing code updates right now. The red dot you see at the intersection of Glen Oak Road is kind of the little commercial Main Street node. So that's the kind of the general uses. There's a creek and some geologic hazard areas, as well as the BPA power lines and an idea of a linear park, which I'll talk about as we move forward on a separate slide. So we have an adopted map. We have these sideboards of number of jobs and number of housing units. We have identification of these sub-districts, and then we have the concept plan map. So I kind of made these little, this is the sandbox we're playing in is in the middle of all these boxes. So we're taking a look and reading through the adopted plan to see, pull out things that can be implemented by zoning code. So some things in the plan are aspirational, like the city should work with Clackamas Community and College and the high school to help provide jobs and job training in the Beaver Creek concept plan area. We can't add a zoning code requirement for that, but that's something that the City Commission could put on one of their goals. So we're trying to separate what things are really zoning code implementation. So those could be uses allowed in these sub-districts. What zoning districts do we want to use today? What ones do we have in the city? Should we amend for the Beaver Creek Road concept plan area? Some uses may not be appropriate, or some uses that are not in today's zones may be appropriate to add in these districts. Dimensional standards, restrictions, height, open space, outdoor storage, how many stories, should we have ground floor commercial required in some areas? That's the kind of thing we're looking at, but it's still, we're not making it up, we're reading through the adopted plan to see what clues are we given. And so there's still questions, but we're in this sandbox inside these kind of boundaries. And then we also have the question of, we have this watercolor map. Now we have to actually turn that into a zoning map and comprehensive plan map with actual tax lots. And where do those lines all perfectly fit up? Because you don't want a tax lot to have, 90% of their tax lot one zone and 10% the other, because you just tried to put a watercolor drawing over the reality. So we're kind of looking at where the rubber meets the road on that piece. So we have done quite a lot since January. We've had 2 public meetings. We had a meeting in January at the Oregon City High School Library, as well as one in April. And we have a consultant team led by Elizabeth Decker, who's been working on the Equitable Housing Project, and Steve Faust, who's with 3J Consulting. They've both been working on the Equitable Housing, so they know our code pretty well and kind of could hit the ground running. We've identified the major elements of each plan. We've looked at our existing zones. We've been given a recommended memo, and that's on our website, which I'll show how to get to that at the end of the presentation. And we've kind of done an initial attempt to place the zoning map in reality on tax lots. And we are right now scoping our infrastructure analysis memos, our transportation memos, and some real estate and economic analysis memos. So what's next? We have meetings like this, I'm making presentations to boards and commissions. We have a planning commission work session on May 13th here at the commission chambers and a city commission work session on June 11th. And we have an open house at the commission chambers on June 10th before the city planning commission meeting. And what products that are coming out of that will be draft zoning and comprehensive plan maps, actual red line code amendments. You can look at the proposed code and the technical memos. The hearings that will adopt these work products will happen later this summer. So as I explained, the products are zoning and comprehensive plan maps and any amendments to our districts or zoning code or any development standards that need to be amended for just Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan area. And as always, zoning is a piece of the puzzle. So this is kind of a continuum of how properties get developed. First, on the left-hand side, you have a concept plan adopted that gives new uses to an area that was previously not in the urban growth boundary. Some properties in Beaver Creek have actually already been annexed, and they're keeping their county zone of FU10, which is future urban 10 acres, so it's a holding zone. Normally, they were, because this took quite a while, some properties came in early and are waiting for this rezone. But usually you annex and then you have an adopted map and you will have the new zone based on when you annex. And then really the development of these parcels is based on the market and property owners' wishes. So we could adopt these zoning codes, but we can't tell a property owner when they want to develop. Only the market and their individual decisions will determine when it makes sense for them to develop. And of course, even after development review, building construction takes a year or two to start after that. So after we adopt all these zoning codes, there's still some infrastructure timing and funding questions. All of the capital improvements that are required, we believe, are in the master plans, the water, sewer, storm master plan. The Parks Master Plan was cross-referenced the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan, but there may need to be some more refinement as we move forward. And then this question of, what offsite improvements are required for each development application is going to be run through the development process based on proportionality, and as also system development fees that are paid. So when we looked at how to implement the concept plan, we looked at existing city zones, identified shortcomings that may or may not work for the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan areas, and then we're gonna have a sub-element area. So if you take a look at one of our zones like campus industrial, you might see at the bottom of the campus industrial zone, in the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan area, the following uses are allowed, prohibited, conditional uses. So that's how we'll be implementing portions of that. So this is how we think the zoning designations naturally lay out. So the North Employment Campus will have a zone of campus industrial. Mixed Employment Village will be mixed use corridor, which is what our Malala Avenue and 7th Street corridor is. Main Street is neighborhood commercial, which we don't really have neighborhood commercial right now, but some of our concept plan areas envision neighborhood commercial, which is exactly that, kind of like a little node surrounded by, that would make sense being near residential. Our west mixed use neighborhood has high density residential, and east mixed use neighborhood is R5. And of course the R5 do allow some of these new duplex and triplex and cluster housing options that we're looking forward to adopting in the equitable housing. So this is our draft map. You can take a look at the different zones. You'll notice that there's still a little bit of tweaks to have it. There's a poor square lot kind of right north of, and I know you can't see behind me, but if you want to take a look, this poor lot is a good example of how we might need to be a little tweaking, because this has 4 zones on one lot. So within that sandbox, we might be able to amend zoning boundaries a little bit, but you still have to say, have you met the number of jobs? Have you met the number of housing? Does it generally look the same as what we adopted? So that's the kind of things we're working at, is what's the actual line of the zoning designations. And hopefully we don't have a poor parcel with 4 zones when we're all done. This is some of the acreage that we are identified, and we're trying to match those up with the zoning. The way the concept plan looked at the Bonneville Power Administration easement areas is those have opportunities for trails, but those also have opportunities for industrial properties to have some parking lots and storage of vehicles or other, maybe a small amount of outdoor storage. So it's a combination of, they can't have buildings in those BP easements, but might be some site circulation and parking lots that'll be allowed. So that relationship of trails to those needs and how do we implement that as development happens. So some of those parks, open spaces, and roads, it may not be as high as 169 when we get the actual development area. So just real quickly, I'm gonna kind of walk you through these different these different sub-districts. So you have the North Campus. This is what we really see kind of more in the red soils area. This is a good example. Benchmade knives is a good example of a use that would be permitted in this zone. We definitely want to keep outdoor storage to a minimum because we want to have high jobs producing uses. So right now our consultant is recommending 25% maximum outdoor storage. And so those are some of the questions we're kind of asking the community. Is that too much? Is that not enough? We know we don't want to allow a lot, but how much is enough? Because all buildings need some outdoor storage and, just to be able to move things around, but how much is too much? So those are some of the questions. No minimum maximum site size. And then there's both on the north end, we're proposing an additional buffer next to residential uses. So the mixed use employment, this is more along Beaver Creek. So it could allow uses like Benchmade, something that could still be permitted within kind of a campus use, but also potentially more office or commercial and maybe some upper story residential. The village, this little node, we're looking at really kind of, ideally 2 to 3 story buildings. Even if it's 1 story, to have more of a 25-foot height requirement. There's a question of, do we require ground floor retail in this area? It's not very big. It's probably a block and a half worth of area. And how do we create kind of a pedestrian experience in that block and a half and have parking in the rear? So those are some of those building design standards we're looking at. How can you pull in on the other side of Glen Oak Road, have that little node where you feel as a pedestrian, you can kind of walk there and go out to dinner, go grab coffee at a coffee shop, feel comfortable. But if you also need to drive there, there's parking near you, but you might have to, drive and park in the rear of the building. Oh, that's Main Street, I'm sorry. The mixed use employment form, I was one off. This is also looking at kind of just north of the Main Street. So that's that 4 blocks.
Want to define what FAR was?
Oh, FAR. So floor area ratio is an example of an intensity of use. And it's often what planners and cities do to kind of say, we're not telling you what exactly your building looks like and how many stories, but we're kind of telling you the intensity on the block. So a good example, if you have a block in Oregon City, like a traditional downtown block is 40,000 square feet. If you had a 1-to-1 FAR, that means you'd have to have somewhere on that block 40,000 square feet. So you could have 2 stories of 20,000 square feet. You could have 4 stories of 10,000 square feet, but your FAR is 1-to-1, so land to building. If it's 2-to-1, then you would have 80,000 square feet. So if it's 0.5, that means you'd have 20,000 square feet required. So we're actually at a 0.35. So it's a pretty small floor area ratio, so it's less than 1-to-1 of your land. But it's still kind of requiring more development than you might see at, the Safeway development, I don't think is at a 0.35 FAR, for example. So that's what floor area. So we're kind of looking at that. What's the right amount? Once again, since we're expanding our urban growth boundary, we want efficient use of our land.
And I presume some of that is associated with parking needs and so forth in the area.
Yeah, and so with parking needs, you don't necessarily have to have that. Well, actually, that's exactly right. Your 0.35, that's understanding kind of what our general parking requirements would be, but it's also not allowing over parking. So this is some example of the Main Street. Once again, it's a little node. So we're gonna prohibit, Glen Oak access. So you'd have to maybe get to the rear, not from Beaver Creek, but kind of imagine a 2-block street facing with parking in the rear, and maybe potentially an alley access. So the two mixed-use neighborhoods, the south, the residential, this is taking our R2 mixed-use zone, but potentially looking at, if you want to have a little commercial use, you could, live-work units could be an opportunity. We're still kind of, it was really envisioned in the Beaver Creek concept plan that a lot of uses were a lot more meshed together, and there was a lot more integration of commercial, residential, and industrial. And so we're trying to honor that, but at the same time, we still have to have districts and uses. Cottage housing or cluster housing is an option in this area. And then the east mixed-use neighborhood is kind of more your traditional 5,000 square foot lot, single-family home subdivision with some, potential duplex, triplex options. So one question people have had about design standards, because there's been some design standard questions in the South End and Park Place concept plan areas, and we've looked through the concept plan for Beaver Creek, and we just did not see a level of design direction for single-family homes that were in the other two concept plan areas. And so our goal is to not create something that doesn't exist, so we're trying to pull from our source document. So right now, we're not recommending any additional design standards for residential, because we just don't see anything in the document describing what they would be. And this is not a new public engagement process to create those. We are synthesizing what's already been adopted. There's also definitely a direction to ensure that properties just to the very south of the golf course at the urban growth boundary have adequate landscape screening. And so there are some existing trees, but then we're also recommending that this area be more single-family residential with just a little bit larger backyards, but not too much, just to have that screening. So that's part of the recommendation coming out of this process. And here we are, your slide, parks, trails, and open space. So what we're trying to figure out is how to move forward, and as development happens, ensure that we have open space, view corridors, and these trails that were identified as development moves forward. I don't have the answer for you tonight, but we're still working on it to make sure that there's a nexus, so we have a proportionality for properties that come in, and how do we ensure that at least, even if it's not built, that we have land set aside for open spaces. So in this Beaver Creek concept plan, it identifies the BPA corridors. And once again, you can't see my, you can look behind you if you can, lay my laser pointer. But these are the BPA corridors. And once again, it may not be this wide, but there'll be, look, how do we make sure trails get in them as development happens in this campus industrial area. And then here, this is the most interesting piece, is a linear open space. So how do you create a linear open space? Once again, it may not be that exact shape because this is a concept plan. And it may be, a couple of amoebas connected with bike and ped trails, so it still feels like a linear park, but it might be more strings of a necklace. I mean, there may be multiple ways that we can implement this linear park. So we're looking at different ways that it can be done that's proportional. So we can't make a developer, if it's not proportional, dedicate all the land and build a park. So we're trying to figure out how we can use zoning code to help move that process along. Zoning code may not be the only thing that does it, but there may be parts in the zoning code that help with that process. There's also right here at the edge where it has Thimble Creek, there's a view corridor area. So there's a road that kind of goes up at the top. This is at the kind of the higher point of the flat area of the golf course, and you can look out as the topography falls down, and there's some really pretty views. So there's an idea of kind of this open area with views on kind of one side of the road for a certain amount of I think there's a certain amount of feet. And so how do you actually implement that through a subdivision code, and then who owns that space? And how do you maintain it, and how do you exact it? So those are the things we're looking at, and we don't quite have the answer for you, but hopefully in the next 2 months, we'll have a better kind of a plan of how to do that. There is Thimble Creek, which will have some natural resource overlay protection that's already in our code. And then there's some definitely geologic hazard areas in this corner, so there'll be definitely reduced and additional review for homes in this area because of geologic hazards. So this is generally the Parks and Open Space and Trails plan. This is a map which you have a hard copy, and we kind of took our natural resource overlay district, which is the streams, and the geologic hazard, which is the the stream mark, and then there's the geologic hazard is actually also in this hash mark here. And then the pink area is once again that kind of linear open space. And the power line corridors are in gray. So it kind of just, it's actually quite a constrained area when you put all those things together. Ooh. So the next step, as I mentioned, we have 3 memos coming to help us. We have 3 sub-consultants that are doing a transportation capacity analysis because we are rezoning properties, so we are going to look at like I generally do. But our public works director and definitely what we heard at the 2 open house meetings, they're going to look at 3 additional things that are outside of kind of beyond a rezone request. One, to look at Beaver Creek Road. Right now it's proposed to be a 3-lane section, so 1 lane in either direction and a center turn lane. And what happens when if you design as a 5-lane section, so 2 in either direction and a center turn lane. There's still going to be capacity issues at 213 and Beaver Creek, so there's upsides and downsides. You may have a little extra capacity in that space, but you're going to be at a pinch point again. So our transportation consultant is going to kind of probably give us a matrix of like the upsides and the downsides of what a 3 to 5 is: cost, design, what you get out of it, what you don't get out of it, and they'll be able to share with our planning commission, city commission, and the public. We're going to look at utility capacity. We think we have everything in our master plans, but we're going to have someone double check to make sure we do have everything we need for sewer, storm, water. And then economic development analysis. Have we created a code that actually is addressing market trends? Are we so far out that we're going to be waiting 30 years? Are we not ambitious enough? Are we thinking back 10 years ago? Like where do we fall in market trends for this? Is this an appropriate? And will this zoning code get us the jobs we hope? And then so they'll recommend any changes they see if there's something off on our proposal. So that's, I just said that, so that's this slide. What we also heard from the public is Beaver Creek Road concept plan is really confusing because there's also the hamlet of Beaver Creek. And the hamlet of Beaver Creek is a couple miles south of Oregon City. And so I've actually tried really hard to say Beaver Creek Road, which I didn't tell you, Phil, because I saw you put Beaver Creek. So I'm working really hard to make sure I say Beaver Creek Road concept plan, not Beaver Creek, because we're not planning the hamlet of Beaver Creek. But Beaver Creek Road concept plan is just a name. So we also reached out to the public and said, should we change the name of this area as part of these zone code amendments? And if we should, what should it be called? And
Thimble
so
Creek.
what?
Thimble Creek.
Well, that is on the list. So we have, there is a survey online, and I can have Phil send links out to this after the meeting tonight. But there's a couple names that we've already come out. We've heard East Caulfield, Thimble Creek, 2 Creeks, a couple more. So I think we're going to kind of give our recommendation to the city commission what we heard. Some people said no. A lot of people said yes. So it's kind of been all over the board, but I don't think anybody in the city is necessarily bound by this name. It was the name of a road because the project was on Beaver Creek Road. So that may be a way to help further differentiate. This is not the hamlet of Beaver Creek. This is an urban growth boundary area of Oregon City. So we'll find out, what comes to play with that. But there could be a new name for this area as part of these zoning amendments. So how can you stay involved? We have a website. It's called Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan, orc.org. If you go to the planning department page on the top right-hand side of the blue columns, you can link right there. Once again, we have our upcoming public meetings, and our public hearings will start later in the summer, probably late July and August. So that is where we are. We have a lot of documents online. I just printed out two, but we can give you links. And if you all want to, I can all add your names onto our interested parties list. We have about 138 names on there, and I have a MailChimp I send out. So if anybody doesn't want to, let me know, but I can add you all on so you can just kind of be getting updates. I send updates whenever there's new information, and you can kind of follow that, and we follow it through the public hearings as well. So I'm available for questions.
I guess, one thing that, the concern of traffic and so forth, and I notice you have the road system connecting into Thayer Road, and I guess one of my concerns is that,
I'm gonna go back to the map, if that's all right, might be helpful.
one of my concerns is that people to avoid avoid the intersection will go down to Redland Road and tie that up even further than it is now. And I don't know if you're looking at that, how you can be
Yeah, there's
able to
actually
deal with that.
two more things we're looking at. This Thayer Road extension to Holly Lane was in our 2013 TSP, or Transportation System Plan. So we're having our consultants look at the modeling and say, well, what if that didn't exist? Does it all fall apart? Is that the linchpin of the TSP? How important is that road? And we're gonna find out, they're gonna let us know. And the other thing, which I'll add, is there are some proposed roundabouts on Beaver Creek as part of the 2008 model. We will be putting a light in at Myers, there's a light in at Myers Road. And so what's the relationship of roundabouts and existing lights? And so we're gonna have our consultants say, what are the upsides of keeping a roundabout design on Loader and Glen Oak? What are the upsides, downsides? What are the upsides and downsides of switching it to a signalized intersection on Loader Road and Glen Oak? So we're gonna hear back on that as well.
I noticed when I gave a presentation at the junior ROTC there in their facility, and I made the mistake of leaving during the school let out. It was very difficult to get out of that onto Myers. I mean, the school itself causes issues,
Yeah.
and I'm sure the development there will cause issues too. So I imagine that's one thing you have to look at in great detail.
Yeah, there is. I mean, you can't plan your city on school let out, because every school all over the
Yes.
nation, when school gets in and out, it's the reality. I think the push and pull of transportation is just adding new roads and adding more capacity doesn't magically solve things, because we don't have the money, A, and B, just because you add capacity, people often will use that capacity as soon as you add the extra lane. So there's that myth of adding an extra lane will create the capacity, but you get that triple net problem of people that didn't used to drive at that time because there was traffic now start to drive at that time and take up the capacity. And people that, use transit because it was easier, maybe not as much here, but adding extra lanes for capacity can be done strategically, but it's not a silver bullet for things. And so, the biggest, I think, upside for the Beaver Creek Road concept plan area is when we say we want more transit in Oregon City. This is a great example because we have transit going in both directions, but like twice a day. So ideally, people are taking transit to the Beaver Creek Road concept plan area for jobs, and people are leaving the Beaver Creek Road concept plan from their houses. And maybe some people are walking down the street. And so it's a lot easier to work with TriMet and advocate for new line extension when you have people in both directions, both times a day, both AM and PM. And so that's, I think, helpful. Oregon City has a gigantic jobs housing imbalance. So what we can do to bring jobs into our city, it's still a macro level. I can't guarantee that only Oregon City residents are gonna get these jobs, but the more Oregon City residents we can provide opportunities for jobs where they don't have to commute 30 minutes, does a lot for our transportation network, as well as providing amenities so you don't have to get into your car and drive 20 minutes to go to do the amenity you want. So providing opportunities for people to walk to a restaurant after dinner means they don't have to get in their car and go to a restaurant if they want to go to a restaurant. So, providing options for people in the southeast part of Oregon City is one thing we can help. But as always, a lot of these transportation projects will only get built if there are SDCs to pay for them, system development fees. And system development fees are garnered by new development. So it's this circular relationship, which is system development fees can't pay for existing capacity problems, only for new growth. And so, what are the additional projects that we could put in this area? And one is the alternate mobility projects. If you've been hearing over the last couple of years, we've been talking about alternate mobility at the intersection of Beaver Creek and 213. One of the projects identified, and it's not the silver bullet, but it's another project, is a auxiliary lane from Beaver Creek to 213 that you don't have to yield. So when you are turning right to go northbound on 213 from Beaver Creek in the morning, right now you yield and you get that backup. So with that project, we'll have a no yield auxiliary lane. So you can have a lot more cars go through that intersection in the morning to get north. So that will alleviate some of the issue. But once again, we have to look at land use to help us with transportation as well, because we can't build our way out, but also we can't build roads to solve all of our problems. So how can we bring jobs and amenities to people that are already in the city? It's kind of a piece of this project too.
Christina, you were talking about the utility capacity planning. You mentioned public utilities, but I'm assuming Northwest Natural and PGE are part of that.
Yeah, those are private utilities. So as far as we heard from them, they're ready to go when development happens. Usually, we haven't heard that there's any systemic topographical issues or, what we as a city are looking at is for our water, stormwater, and sewer, how do we make sure that we have all of our capital improvement projects? But then also, how do we make sure that when development builds, for example, we've done some work to bring sewer further down Beaver Creek Road and have the right pipe size. So as that develops, how do we continue that right pipe size? And it's oversized for Beaver Creek. There are some questions of how some areas are going to get water, so we're double checking to make sure that we understand where we need our additional reservoir. Once again, this is as I said in the April meeting, we have an obligation to plan for this area. We don't have an obligation to build this area. That's what the private development market will do. So our job as the public is to say, this is how you can do it, or you will be doing it. And then the private side will determine when their projects, the market meets their needs for our improvements. So if there's a certain area that can't be built until X project is done, they'll either build that project or wait till X project is done for our capital improvement. Or maybe they'll just be putting money into it and then we can determine when. But things like pump stations and reservoirs, we need to make sure it's in our plan and our capital improvement. We don't have to guarantee that it's built. That's the crux of our obligations as a city. We have a requirement to plan the area, not to develop the area.
Well, the reason I mentioned PGE Northwest Natural is I've had some experience where cities have grand plans to bring in jobs and then they come to find out that utilities don't have the capacity, at least not readily available, and it takes time to build that stuff. So
as far as I know, that those conversations have been had, but it's a good point in the sense that when we do our analysis, our consultant team will address it, but it's usually not. Our goal, our job as a city is to make sure that we have coordinated with private utilities and and any issues that they've identified, we've made sure is known.
One of the, talking to Westland, and one of the issues they have is their industrial and residential is essentially out of phase. If residential comes in first, then those people aren't going to work at the site, and I know you don't have any control of it. But I think the great idea of having residential so close to the light industrial is that people can live in the area. But
Yeah.
oftentimes that doesn't happen, just simply because of housing demands that go in first, and some of the industrial infrastructure required is greater, and they come in later, and a lot of the housing's already gone.
That's true. You still have to think big picture. So I'm a planner. I always think 30 years ahead. So that's exactly true. We can't control that, but what we can do is make sure that there is land set aside and zoned correctly so we don't underdevelop the areas. And then what I always say, and my consultant is perfect. She says, zoning can only do so much. You can't, the zoning code can't implement all the community's goals and wishes. So there are things like how, if bringing jobs to Oregon City is a big goal for the city, well, then it's working with our economic development department and say, well, what are the gaps? Like what are the, if industry is not coming soon because there's this gap, what is it and how can the city help reduce those barriers? And that's really more of an economic development lens than a zoning code lens. And so that's what we're trying to pull apart, like what things need to happen in the zoning code and what is still stuff we gotta work on, and do we can industry come in with market rate approach today, or are there still barriers? And if there are barriers, let's identify them and work to reduce them.
So the part that's already annexed, that's all campus industrial, isn't it?
No, most of the area that's annexed is the golf course, which is mainly residential, and this commercial node.
I thought it was the airport.
The airport's right here, so it's a combination of a lot of things.
Right here.
It's a
Okay.
combination of kind of this commercial and office and light, campus industrial. And then this area, which is this is kind of the light purple. So the airport is kind of more this area right here. And this is more the golf course.
Okay. And it depends,
And they're FU10 right now.
yeah, okay. A lot depends on the type of companies we want to attract too.
Right, and as a reminder, I can't say in my zoning code, the really good campus industrial.
Clean, green.
Yeah, well, actually, that's exactly correct. There was this, in 2008, we put a lot of goals of being sustainable companies. But a big thing you don't want to do is try to write what today in 2019 is your vision of types of uses that meet your goals and have a really restricted permitted use section. Because if in our concept in 2008, what would be sustainable uses? In 2019, what would be sustainable uses? In 2032, they're all going to be different. And so we have much broader permitted uses. And so that really is having our economic development folks reaching out and really kind of pounding the pavement and trying to bring in those. But we also need to have some carrots, because it's hard to bring people in when you don't have any carrots. So can we get grants to help reduce barriers for redevelopment and use those carrots to help try to bring the right companies we really want? I mean, that's that relationship between economic development and the zoning code.
I have a question. Go ahead, you wanna go?
No, you go ahead, I'll go after him.
Mine, actually, I got three
Sure.
easy questions.
Ooh, good.
So how does the power line corridor area affect what's going to happen with development in that concept plan?
Well, we're trying to figure it out. We say we want trails underneath there, but we also say we want private development to have some of that area for parking. So I'm relying on my consultant she's working on how do you use the zoning code to balance those two things? And so we hope to have some of those red lines as probably the end of May, how to balance both of those.
The other question I had, and maybe it's executive session material, but are we looking at purchasing any open space up there for parkland? We haven't had that. Have we had that discussion before? That's why I'm curious if that's something that's also part of the concept plan.
Yeah, I think the conversation we're having is how do we identify and make possible the ability to have parkland open space in that area. So whether that is through the planning process or whether it is through some type of agreement with the property owners, but that this concept plan serves as an auxiliary document to our Parks and Recreation Master Plan and identifies specific goals for open space development. And then, it's our job to try to secure those properties in the best way that we can, working with the property owners.
It's like, it's a balance. We don't want to just say, we'll let, the city acquire the property, because what happens if that doesn't happen? Then we have no parks. And we don't have a way to get there, but we also can't do it all with the zoning code.
And the last question had nothing to do with this subject, except that we're going to be eventually talking about the South End concept master.
Well, that's already had its implementation of zoning.
It's already implemented ahead of this.
Yeah, that was done more in 2014.
And were parks part of that discussion?
No, so parks were not, and that is really more of the acquisition process, and I don't think what we're trying to do is we don't want to be in that place with Beaver Creek Road concept plan area. That we don't know exactly what the right path is for that, of a balance of acquisition and kind of dedication through land use.
Question. When we rezone things, there's no guarantee that people are gonna develop it, build it, sell it, right? It's just what's to come. I believe the airstrip there, they've expressed interest in selling their property. So that's, I guess, good for the plan. I think I'm not, some of this is old news, but I don't think the golf course is adamant about remaining exactly as they are, so I think they're open to some things, is right? Is it up for sale still? Okay. But the other thing that hasn't been mentioned here is the school district owns some property right there.
So they own property right here.
Right. And so my question is, what have we done with developing this plan and talking to the district to make sure that even though it's not part of the plan, that something's considered? Because they do have talks periodically about doing something with that land, building potentially a school. It's not in their bond right now, but it's something that continually comes up. And I would hate to have a brick wall, figuratively speaking, between the
This road
plan.
right here will connect to this school. So even if this subdivision is built, there will be a dead-end street here.
Well, no, I understand that, but I'm talking figurative brick wall of, hey, this is our plan. Now the district just has to simply do whatever they do to comply. I mean, I think it's worth a discussion to say, hey, what are your long-term plans and how can we best help you and make you aware of what we're doing so that you can best help us?
Yeah, and we are working closely with Wes Rogers at the school district. He's been going to all of our meetings. I think they're just not at a place yet where they have more than, we want to put a school there and that's probably the road it's going to connect to.
Right, no, and I agree with all of that, but I'm sure in the back of someone's mind, there's more to it than that. And I mean, Wes Rogers is handling the bonds now, but have you spoken also with the operations managers over there?
No.
Which is not Wes Rogers anymore?
We've been working, what?
Which is not Wes Rogers anymore because he's working on the bond.
Right. So no, we haven't.
Yeah.
You know, what we've been getting is making sure that they're involved. I don't know, I promise, I don't know at this level, we're gonna get more detail than what we have. And so I think the key takeaways are, all the single-family homes here share a private driveway. So development probably is not coming out to Beaver Creek laterally. They're gonna probably be connecting up into this area. As you get farther in the south, that's really in the county. And I don't, the problem is that school is not on their near range. So our goal is to make sure, what are we doing to make sure that we don't preclude future connections? We don't preclude the ability for them to have more connections, both in all directions. And we kind of have to control the north part. I do know that the development next door, there's really, because it's a private driveway, they're not going out that way, they're coming into the project. And which makes sense, because there's gonna be lights or either roundabouts or signals at these larger intersections. So traffic is gonna be coming in and out through these major intersections.
I just think it's worth the discussion. I mean, you say it's a little early now. I guess that's where I would say that I don't think it is early, simply because there has been less than an amicable partnership between the district and the city. And I think this is a great opportunity to go in there and say, hey, we really care about what you're doing. Not just telling you what we're doing and hoping you can make it work, but what do you want to do and how can we make this work for you? And I think there's a great opportunity there.
We have been, so I will continue.
Okay.
It's come up actually before here. The concern, of course, we have about parkland, that I believe the urban growth boundary extends to Reese Road in this area. excuse me, the urban reserve, I'll take that back.
Correct,
Yeah, the
the
urban
urban
reserve
reserve.
does. And whether the city could buy land for parks in that area when it's less expensive and when it actually gets pulled into the urban growth boundary and have that land available.
That's why I'm gonna have you look at our director.
But we talked about it. But
Yeah, and
Yeah, and I think that's above and beyond. I mean, I think I'm gonna do my, like, this is my sandbox of staff, but it really is, I have a sandbox of staff, which is, we've identified an open space in this concept plan area, how are we gonna get there? If the city sees other opportunities for compatible, complementary open space, and that's a larger city commission discussion. But I think, right now, I have marching orders through an adopted plan to look at open space in this area.
And we continue to have conversations both internally, as well as working interdepartmentally, identifying properties and what type of interactions they have, both with new development as well as our overall goals of acquisition and land banking.
Any further questions? I think not.
Okay, so look for new emails from me from a MailChimp email, probably a couple of weeks when we get more information. Follow us. If you want to comment, we still have our comment forms online. We have an online version of this too. So in the next, probably tomorrow, I'll send some links for Phil and he can forward out to you.
Thank you, Christina. Very important.
do you have plans to make a presentation to the Natural Resource Committee?
Yeah, I can do that. I'll work with Pete.
I'm not the chair anymore, but yes.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I am doing it next week because he's been out of town, but I will work with Pete to see which one.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And I maybe have one recommendation for the chair. I realized this after we set the agenda, but I know that the Water Board Park discussion kind of played into the goals discussion, and maybe we bump that to the first item so that we can at least talk about Water Board Park before we further have conversations around the practical goals.
Certainly. So that would be, looking for the correct document.
Item 6G.
Yes. And there we go, Waterboard Park. And what I did notice, we had item 6 on our goals. That's what caught my eye.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so I know that there was some conversation around wanting to know more information about Waterboard Park before adopting the goals. And so this will allow us to ask questions and have that conversation, and then we can further elaborate on the conversation around goals after that.
Yes, that's item 6 on the 2019-21 goals.
Oh, on the goals, yeah.
Yeah. All right, open for discussion.
So I have a short presentation for the Waterboard Park. If this is the worst touchscreen of all time. Hey, it worked. Okay. So I'm gonna have a brief conversation about Waterboard Park. Again, this is primarily a discussion opportunity for the committee, but I'm passing around a visual to help us. It is also on the PowerPoint presentation, but it's a little difficult to see on the PowerPoint presentation, so hopefully this will help you. So Waterboard Park, again, the PowerPoint's mostly just a visual. We're gonna continue to have that conversation, but it came up most recently because there was members of the community that were very interested in making sure that the what the city identifies as the upper yard space for the Public Works facility and what some members of the community identified as Lower Waterboard Park. There was a lawsuit to stop the development of the upper yard space. And again, what members of the community thought was Lower Waterboard Park. And so going through that process, this was well before the Public Works Department purchased property on First Street. And so now they're kind of moving in a different direction. And I know that there are members of this group that are still very interested in acquiring property and designating it as a park by resolution through the commission. And so what we currently identify as Waterboard Park is that yellow outline green space, Waterboard Park. Just to the north of that, there's a little, and I'm super colorblind, so I do apologize, the blue, I think that is, section, which is the Armory building, and it's owned by the state. And then just to the north of that is the Public Works facility, both the lower facility as well as the upper yard space. This is just the topographic photo image with those same spaces. And then what we have here is the actual survey that was completed. The document is from 2009. This is the base document that's shown on the screen, and then I color-coded the document to show a little bit more specifically what each of the areas are. And so again, the yellow in that image shows Waterboard Park as we currently identify it. The blue section is the Armory properties, and then the orange section is what we currently identify as the Public Works yard space, operations yard. We have the upper yard, which is delineated from the lower yard by the cliff, which is currently dotted there on your image. So you can see kind of where the topography shifts from the upper area down to the lower area. And then we have those two kind of random boxes that are outlined in black near the top. Those are both also part of the Public Works Operations Center. They're just a different tax lot, and so they are identified through a different tax lot. So that whole section in orange is one solid tax lot owned by the city, operated by Public Works for the Public Works Operations Center.
So Phil, can you tell us what's identified as upper and lower Waterboard Park?
Yeah, so if you're looking at, let's see if, wrong one. So the upper yard is, so where the dotted line, that's kind of the bluff separating
That's for
the
Public
lower.
Works that you're talking about, right? The yards?
Yeah, so this is the Public Works lower Public Works space, which is adjacent to Center Street, and then you have this area, which is the upper yard space, and was kind of the conflict area between members of the community and the Public Works Department as they were looking to develop the space. There is a road that runs through the property right along here. It has been vacated, so it's actually part of each of the properties, not actual roadway. So we do have an actual road that comes in along this edge, and then we have some undeveloped roadway, unimproved roadway in this area, and then again the vacated roadway which runs through and then exits out onto Center Street.
So the question is whether or not we want to incorporate that area as a park?
Yeah, so it's been in operation as the Public Works operations area for at least half a century, if not longer.
We realize there's houses there?
That's outside the orange line.
Yeah, so there is a house right here on the corner, which is actually owned by the city, and was purchased with Public Works funds, which has access through this roadway. And then the other housing units are over here on this side. So this full section over here is all Public Works owned. There are a couple of structures on site, and then this is the armory facility, which is owned by the state. During the proposal for the Public Works Operations Center, they were proposing to acquire the state-owned property and incorporate it into the overall design of the Public Works Operations Yard.
So those are the other buildings that are next to the armory, the other two? Okay, I blew it up. I was there this weekend, I was checking it out.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm looking at it as much, either smaller or bigger. This is a lot smaller than what I was thinking it was, land-wise.
Yeah, it's not a huge section of land.
So what's the public disagreement? I mean, what's their issue, just other than the fact that, I mean, because it is an existing public works site.
Correct. At one point, it was shown on a Parks and Recreation Master Plan as a future park, possibly.
Okay.
And the map included part of that section. It was never fully realized and was never designated as a park. And so that's kind of where the conflict is.
I was just going to add, when, before the city obtained the First Street property, Public Works was talking about expanding into this particular area. Now that Public Works has a First Street property, the question is, how could this land be best utilized?
Yeah.
I want to clarify one thing a little bit. The judge was very clear, this is not part of the park. That's no longer in dispute.
Correct.
And I finally decided yesterday to call John Lewis. And it's like, I'd like some straight answers here. One of the answers that John gave me surprised me a little bit. It could be up to 2 years before Public Works is completely settled in at First Street and knows what their other needs are, which is another reason I oppose that being in our goals here.
Our 2-year goals.
Because it's, and, Public Works is more than happy to work with us down the road. I've never seen any problem working with them as a department. And I would suggest that we drop that for now. And once we're closer to their being able to decide what needs they have for this property, at that point, we start working with them to see, is there a portion that we can use for a park? Is there a portion that you need to use? Or by then, do we get the whole shebang? But it's too far down the road, I think, to include that in our goals at this point. I have a comment, real quick comment. Parking area.
Yeah, it's a disaster, just to get in the park.
Yeah, there's virtually no parking. And now that we have the parking cut off at the top of the hill.
That's a good point. Yeah, part of the proposed concept for the Public Works facility when it was going to be here on the Center Street property was to include a number of parking spaces off of that roadway adjacent to the Armory building. So there would have been 5, I think, parking spots dedicated that would have entered directly into the trail system for Waterboard Park. Whereas right now, with them not developing that property, trying to identify long-term parking opportunities for the park.
Well, the ultimate use, no matter what our recommendation is, the ultimate use is going to be determined by the city commission. The point of Bill Daniels making the motion, I guess I made the motion because it was such a hot item with the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, was to actually indicate the park, our support for this being considered for park land. I don't think there was any anticipation on our part that it would be made a park before Public Works had its other land and had it developed. I don't think there was any intention. It was an expression of our desire to have it as a park in the future.
I would have to agree with what Doug has said. I think these are goals that are 2 years out, and we can move that again another 2 years if necessary, but I think it's important that we keep it on our list of goals for the
So
city commission.
what I'm hearing is keep it on our goals, but not necessarily make it a high priority.
I would agree with that.
Are there any comments or objections to that?
Yeah, when we put forth goals, we're telling the community what we're planning on doing. And then to put it on the goal, but say, well, we're not really going to do anything about it.
Yep.
I think it's a conflicting message. There's nothing wrong with removing it now to send a clear message of what what our goals really are, and it can come back. We can always put it on there another day, another year.
Well, we don't want it to get lost. Can we have
That's why
future goals?
That's why we have people in the office upstairs. They make notes and they put it on the calendar to bring it up in January, and we go over it again. I mean, the community won't let us live this down. I mean, if they want it to be brought back, it'll be brought back. I don't think we're going to forget about it. I just have a challenge when we tell the community this is our goal, but then really we're not going to do anything about it. That's the biggest problem I have.
I don't think that's, there are short-term goals and there are long-term goals.
Yeah.
And and this would be perceived as a long-term goal. I don't see a point in removing it just because we can't meet it in 2 or 4 years.
Then I would suggest we add something that tells what our real intent is, and not to rehash my comments from last time, but goals need to be measurable. And if the measurability of that goal is we will address this in 2011 or 2021, then we put that, or late 2020. So at least we're communicating clearly what our intent is. I think is reasonable.
Maybe we should move it to additional items of importance.
I agree. Or
Fair
a
enough.
long-term goal, have a parking, I hate to use the word, table, maybe table it to long-term, create another category.
So I'm going to weigh in. I think to Troy's point, the whole point of having a goal and a timeline called out here is that these are things we're hoping to accomplish within that time frame. And based on what I've heard, the Public Works doesn't know if they're going to need that area. We have two very large concept areas that are gearing up for construction. They will probably very well need more space, and to take that away now and potentially create a disjointed Public Works department in areas. I mean, we have that now, and it's a nightmare. And we have pockets of city facilities everywhere. And I never have believed that this belonged on here to begin with. But to set a goal now, not knowing what the need is for that property, I think is misguided.
I have to make a comment. When I was mayor, this item, actually, the expansion of the upper yard was actually a topic, and I supported the Public Works expansion onto it. But I posed the question, if that expansion occurred, is that going to make your long-term needs in terms of Public Works in the future? And the answer was yes. This would make the upper yard to make their long-term needs. If that's the case, I assume the property they have purchased now will meet their long-term needs without having this piece in there. But the point is, I'm happy to move it to a long-term goal and have it there at that statement, but I would not support removing it as a goal.
Can we move to 6A?
Yeah.
Sure.
Seems like we're kind of moving in that direction.
Okay, yeah.
I move that we delete item number 6 on the proposed Park and Recreation Advisory Goals.
Second.
Vote.
Further discussion?
The only problem I have with that, I'd either like to see another category for future goals or long-term goals and move it there.
Motions to delete.
So we have a motion on the table for that. We don't have to it's up to you as far as the vote, so you all get to vote on that motion unless it's
I'm gonna move for a amendment to have that move to a long-term goal on our list.
Second.
I would second that.
I think you seconded it.
Okay, now we have a motion.
Vote on the amendment.
Yeah, we need to vote on it first.
Yes.
Vote on the amendment, and then you vote on the
and then
motion.
vote on the motion.
Okay.
I appreciate somebody who knows Robert's Rules of Order.
If I can teach teenagers, I can teach adults.
Thank you. I'm
So unless
getting
there's further discussion on the amendment, we can vote on the amendment, which would be to move item number 6 from a goal on the numbered items down to the additional items of importance.
I have one comment, or part of the discussion, I guess. I don't understand how you can have a goal that's dependent upon action that will happen, whether or not, the way I understand it is, everything's dependent on what Public Works needs. Is that fair to say?
It's a conversation.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, it's a conversation for the city commission can decide to make that decision as the leaders of the city docket. So, us, PRAC, as an advisory committee, makes recommendations to the city commission, and city commission makes decisions given the information they receive both from their
So the
advisory
city commission is
committees as well as
deciding what to do with it?
Yeah, we
Ultimately,
have
they
no
will.
power.
Yeah.
We have no.
Ultimately, they will.
Advisory
We're gonna
committee.
recommend to them.
And I think part of the problem is the conversation has been treated as an either or. And when it can be an us, and there may be ways to share use and both get what we need.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a conversation down the road.
Yeah, and to your point, Karen, the current footprint that they were planning to use at this location is roughly the same footprint as the First Street property, but they're also incorporating both park operations as well as possibly engineering at that location. And so there may very well be some additional offsite needs, which may include this property. So it is definitely a conversation that will continue to happen as they work through the concept planning for the First Street property and move into construction. And then ultimately, once you're in your house and you really figure out how things work and what you need, things can sometimes change, so.
So just one last comment about, before we vote on the amendment. And it's the same concern I had when we voted on this originally. And that is, we are talking about expanding an existing park into Public Works property when we have many other parts of the city that are underserved by parks that need it. And even if this was incorporated into a park, we have no money to develop it
No,
and won't for a very, very, very long time.
That's right.
that's true.
So I just wanted to put that out there.
And I think if I can counterpoint what Chris is saying is all, with due respect, I think the purpose of this is to get this area into a charter protection. And that's not going to happen if we don't include it as part of Waterboard Park. In other words, does the public want to see that land used for anything but park property? And that's the question that the commission will be challenged with, I'm sure sooner than later.
I mean, how long ago was Filbert Run brought in as a park? I presume with the development about 15 years ago or so.
Well, it was officially recognized as a charter park about a little over a year ago, but it was
But I mean, it's
brought in as a park,
Yeah.
about a decade ago.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's true of all our undeveloped parks that we will eventually find money for.
Yeah, there are grants, and I've seen firsthand this neighborhood association and what they can accomplish. So,
Call a question.
Cool. Yeah.
okay.
So I will take roll.
I want to make it clear, I had it as a long-term goal, not as an additional item. That was my motion.
Oh, okay, so we'd create a third category of long-term goal.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification. So I will take roll on designating item number 6, moving it down to a new category of long-term goals. Daniels?
Aye.
Ballinger,
Nay.
Kugel.
Aye.
Sorry, I trying to realize that I should probably keep tally of this. Cook. Cook.
No.
Maury,
No.
Novak,
Aye.
Neely,
Yes.
Hammock,
Aye.
Kugel. Oh, I'm sorry. The other new guy. My apologies. Yes. And the yeas have it, 6-3.
Long day for everyone, huh?
Now we vote on the motion
Okay, and so we vote on the motion
to delete 6.
to delete item 6.
Okay.
So do we need a roll for that?
We will take roll, yes.
Okay.
Daniels,
No.
Ballinger,
Well, if we just moved it, we can't have it in two places.
Yes, that's right.
So I guess it's an
Why are we
aye,
voting?
Yes,
because it's on the table, so we have to vote.
yes.
So aye.
Aye.
Kugel, aye, Cook.
I'm gonna abstain.
Abstain. Oh, now I have to make a new category for it. Sally, Mark. Maury,
Aye.
Novak,
Aye.
Neely,
Aye.
passive aggressive, that's right. Hammock.
Aye.
And Sergeant.
Yes.
Okay.
And the motion carries.
And with that taken care of, I move we approve the goals for 2019, 2021.
Second.
All right.
Any further
With the
discussion?
stipulation that number 6 is being moved to a different category.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Do we need a roll on that?
Yes, unless there's further discussion, I will take roll. Daniels,
Aye.
Ballinger,
Abstain.
Kugel,
Yes.
Cook,
Abstain again.
Maury,
Aye.
Novak,
Aye.
Neely,
Aye.
Hammock,
Aye.
Sergeant.
Yes.
And the motion carries.
We did it.
Senate when you vote for resolution.
So I'll make those revisions and send them out to the group, and then, they will also, I can also include them on the next meeting as well. And one of the conversations we had in one of the previous meetings was to have the goals maybe on a quarterly basis brought forward for consideration and discussion. So I will, at this point, quarterly be bringing these forward so that we can continue to hopefully be making progress on some of these items. And I know to Troy's comments around measurability, it might be of interest to, I don't know if there's a subcommittee or some other way to start to look at maybe a possible work plan, which might have some of those measurability kind of targets that we could try to identify, which would be more of a strategic plan as opposed to our general goals, which is more of a broad visioning. So if there is interest, we can look at doing something like that.
Phil, I have a question. So these goals are out on the public website. It's just a list of goals. Is there any kind of like update that happens throughout the year or years? Just maybe even a one-sentence summary on each goal as time goes by? I mean, if I was a member of the public and I saw these goals, I would wonder what progress is being made.
Yeah, currently we don't have any formal way to recognize that beyond, we should be doing annual presentations to the city commission.
Okay.
And that's something that we probably, over the next couple of months, should schedule to have the prac chair and vice chair,
But it's
or
never-
prac chair and previous chair, make a presentation to the commission.
Okay.
But yeah, in other forms, we really don't do, which we could do, and maybe that's part of our goal of increasing public awareness of parks and recreation, is that we try to do more of a public engagement around what our goals are and how we're accomplishing them.
And that's where my brain is going, is users of the internet today are looking for one-stop shopping, so to speak. So they see these goals, they want to know what's going on with them.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, a link to those conversations we have with commission, or something to show where we are
Yeah,
in accomplishing, or not. And I would hope that if we're not making headway into these goals and somebody's calling us to the mat.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. And we can definitely start to look at how that information is relayed to the public.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chris. That is good. All right, moving on to item 6B, the Beautiful View House, because I'm not going to pronounce it properly.
Buna is okay.
You know, Mr. House?
The house on the hill.
And since they chose a Spanish name for it, you can call it Buena Vista House. Buena Vista House.
Buena Vista. Now that I
Let's
can,
do the whole way.
that I could go with that. I could roll with that.
So this is just an update on the conversation. We had a conversation last month in regards to the Buena Vista House. And we most recently had I think it was a March City Commission meeting where we discussed the Buena Vista House and the request by the stakeholder group to reconnect electricity. They have raised private funds through the Oregon City Parks Foundation, partial grant, partial loan to move those $5,000 into the reconnecting of power. The City Commission asked for staff to go back and work with the stakeholder group to identify two main pieces of information, one of which was, in addition to the $5,000 that would be required to reconnect the electricity, what would be the anticipated additional expenses. And so staff will be presenting next week on May 1st to the City Commission information on that piece, of which we did make contact with our agent of record for our insurance, and there is no additional insurance premium expense for reconnecting the electricity. The other piece that was brought up was the security needs. Part of the request for the stakeholder group was to connect power so that they could get security lighting on the house, on the structure. And so that is included in the scope of work for the electrical work. We're not anticipating any additional security measures at this point. The house is secure. We've put additional locks on the doors that are both padlocked as well as locked on the deadbolts. And so we do check it periodically. We don't anticipate at this time any additional security expenses. The only other additional expense was the ongoing utility fees, utility bill payments for electricity. The stakeholder group, Todd Island, did some rough calculations based on the electricity needs of the heating units, anticipated that the monthly expenses could be around $40 per month. Staff are trying to take a wider view of that and anticipating that it may be, $500 to $600 annually to provide electricity for that house. Several members of the commission stated during the work session that the stakeholder group should be responsible for the electricity payment monthly bills for that house. So during work session, they don't they can give general direction, but they can't make a decision during a work session. And so we will be presenting information to them on what the overall expense will be, their general direction that they thought that the stakeholder group should be paying for it. And so if we are reconnecting electricity with the stakeholder group paying the monthly bills, there at this time would be no additional expense for the city. Now, they can at the May 1st meeting make whatever decision they would like to make, and so there could be further conversation, and we'll see what comes from that. The other piece that they asked for was a work plan for the Friends group, and so the Friends group did meet, put together a rough work plan for the next 6 months, as well as ongoing goals for the group over the coming year, couple of years, which included some public engagement pieces. The primary goals of the upcoming 6 months, as they identified, were to, 1, turn on the power, 2, to go after historical designation, both locally as well as for the National Register of Historic Places, and then 3, to identify approximate expenses for a phased approach build out for grant funding. And so looking at grants, looking at applicable grants that they could apply for, both that would include requirements for historic designation as well as just general grants that they might be eligible for. And then look at the phased approach of, if it's anticipated that these grants could be up to $100,000, and they need to look at phasing of construction that may include, foundation work of a certain amount of money that would be a first phase, site work for a certain amount of money, which may be a second phase, those types of things. So I'm anticipating additional information from the Friends group at the May 1st meeting, but this is just me relaying the information as I have it to date, and I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
I have some questions. Do we know who did or will put their name on that loan? The city's not putting their name on the loan, is it? You said grants and loans. Someone's got to sign for it. Is that,
yeah,
the city's not, right?
No, it's an arrangement between the Oregon City Parks Foundation, McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, and the stakeholder group, the Friends group.
We're officially named, we're the Friends of Buena Vista Clubhouse.
Sorry, my apologies. So the Friends of the Buena Vista Clubhouse are working very closely with the Oregon City Parks Foundation. They're their fiduciary agent and are assisting them in both kind of the handling of the funds. So they would be working, the funds would be paid directly from the Oregon City Parks Foundation to the multi-phase electric, which is on the bid paperwork.
And the foundation has no connection to the city as far as funding, that they're completely separate.
They're separate 501c3 nonprofit.
Okay, but I would imagine since the property is the city of Oregon City, that anything that gets done on it also has to be signed and approved by the city. Not for the financial responsibility, but just allowing the work.
Yeah.
So I would certainly want to make sure that the city's not having any liability on something, whether it be a bad contractor or someone's not making their payments or whatever else. Because the challenge you have is when they put it in, if the payments aren't made, they want to rip it out. And now they're taking it out as someone else's property, the city's, right? Not the one who didn't make good on the loan. So there's a little bit of something to at least consider.
Yeah.
Maybe a review of documents that were signed by the city before we authorize any work to be done. So we know what our risk is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The city commission will be reviewing it, and they already have, yeah.
Oh, they have?
They're gonna be, yeah. Any other questions?
For the park that it's currently, that the house is currently in, is there, as part of the park's master plan, is there any plan for that parkland itself that the house is currently sitting in? Is there a long-term master plan?
We do not have a master plan on that park specifically. And I know that's been part of the request of members of the stakeholder group, including Mr. Daniels, is to do a master plan for that park specifically. It's a beautiful space that definitely needs a lot of love.
And it is the oldest park in Oregon City that was not part of the McLaughlin plat. So it's got a lot of years of neglect.
It has charter protection,
Yes, it does.
Yes.
The original play equipment still on it.
probably.
Very close to, yes.
And another question, as part of the Parks Master Plan, is there any direction in terms of historic preservation of properties, in terms of priorities versus parkland? Or is preservation of historic buildings even mentioned, or?
No, I think it's, so we do have a requirement of any structure that's owned by the city and is more than 50 years old to determine if it is eligible for a historic designation. Beyond that, we don't have any specific historic interpretation planning for that park or most of our parks.
I just wanted to mention, you may note, there are properties that are in the local inventory of historic places and properties But the city, that restricts of what they can do on the house, but the city bears no responsibility for them.
Any other questions or comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. 16, Willamette Falls Legacy Project.
Great. So I was just speaking with Christina, who reminded me that we have some emails going back and forth attempting to schedule another site visit to the Willamette Falls Legacy Project site. So the Metro staff member who does the organizing for that is aware that the Natural Resource Committee, PRAC, and the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council are interested in doing a site visit. So once we have a date or a couple of dates to choose from, I will send that out via email so that we can hopefully get that scheduled. Christina also mentioned that PG is planning on doing some work on the dam over the summer, which will take a couple of months and may limit access to the physical dam portion of the site. So trying to get it scheduled probably sooner than later so that doesn't impact our ability to go out to the ultimate viewpoint on the tour. So please look for your emails, and if you have interest, respond so that we can get that scheduled. The other items for Willamette Falls Legacy Project, we are still looking at a groundbreaking sometime next spring, so spring of 2020. We have hired a consultant team for design, OTAC, which is responsible for engineering and architectural services. We're also in the process of reviewing a CMGC, general contractor, construction manager. That process closes May 7th, and so then we'll review and interview and get a construction firm on board. We're also looking at a couple of other pieces, including archaeology RFP, programming RFQ, and should have information coming up shortly on both of those contracts. We just had a very successful public tour, which happened last month or beginning of this month. It's all blending together. But we still have something like 1,500 people on the waiting list in order to go out and view the site and tour the property. So staff are working to try to identify additional public tour dates, whether or not they are sometime in the next couple of months, but definitely sometime before the groundbreaking process, because after that we won't be able to get folks out there to tour. So if you've not been on site yet, I highly recommend you hopefully join us for the PRAC tour visit. If you're not able to make it work with your schedule, please sign up for the tour information. They send out emails when they open up the tour dates, but they fill up very quickly. I think the last one's filled up within a couple of minutes, and we had over 1,000 people on site over that weekend. So definitely get on those lists as quickly as you can. I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Any questions? No? Thank you, Phil.
Yeah.
All right, item 6D, PRAC bylaws.
So I did hand out a red line copy from our previous conversation.
And I will say, since we've been so successful in getting things done tonight, that I move we adopt the bylaws as currently presented.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, do we need a roll on this?
We do. Unless there's further comment and discussion, I will take roll.
Take that as a
I see
no?
some contemplative glances at their papers. I'll go ahead and take roll then. Daniels?
Aye.
Bollinger?
Aye.
Kugel?
Aye.
Cook?
Aye.
Maury?
Aye.
Novak?
Aye.
Neely?
Aye.
Hammock? Sargent?
Aye.
And it carries.
I have a question. Wouldn't affect the vote. No, it wouldn't affect the vote. I'm just curious. Why did we scratch shall and put will?
Because it's an ambiguous word.
Shall?
Yeah.
It's a legal term. Means you have no choice.
Ambiguous word,
Okay.
yeah,
No,
that's why,
strange.
to clarity.
And I have a question too. On the,
Alan Willis.
I know we had added the piece about like a intern type position for a local youth. Are we gonna do any kind of outreach for that?
Yeah, so the bylaws have to be approved by the city commission, so I will add them to the next available city commission. The first has already been posted, so it would be the 15th of May. And so after it's been approved by the city commission, then we can start doing our outreach and getting that going.
Great.
Is there interest in, I know that we talked about trying to do it kind of around the school year schedule. Is there interest in getting that process going prior to the beginning of next school year, or doing a partial year for this one and then doing a new process for the next school year? What would that look like?
Personal opinion, I'd wait till the next year and actually coordinate with the school district to kind of inform them of the vision and what we see as a need.
You only got about a month left of this year.
Yeah, so we have the summer to coordinate with them and.
Okay,
I
great.
agree, yeah. It does say though that it's a one-year term. But we talked about that starting at a different time, but I think we agreed not to. It doesn't say that in here, so I think we agreed that it would run
Yeah.
the same time as everything else, right?
We left it ambiguous. The current terms for the current members of this committee, it also does not state specifically when terms will start. It just states that you have a 3-year term. Our practice has been that it's a January 1 start. And I think our practice for the other position could be that it's a school year start position and, a end of school year end position, something to that effect.
Well, I think it's reasonable we ask them to do 12 months. I mean, if they don't or can't, that's one thing, but, if they're a sophomore or junior, they're gonna be here, they can go to meetings like the rest of us go to meetings, and I don't think we need to change that, but, I just wanted a clarification. I remember us having that discussion. And I think, isn't there something on the city level that says all mayor appointments to committees are January? Like, we don't have to have it in our bylaws, but I think it's on the city level where it kind of says that's how he does it, right? Which is why we're starting all in January?
That's because that's when the elected terms begin and end.
Well, I know, but I'm saying we don't have to have it in here because it's the mayor that makes the appointment, and I think the city level says when those are.
Yeah, and I'm not positive on that, but that,
So I think
it
just
would
the
make
1 year
sense.
term is sufficient.
So having it run January to January or January to December, then is that what you're recommending?
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is we were ambiguous here on purpose, but I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
Because I think what supersedes this anyway is when the mayor makes his appointment, it is a January 1 start.
Yeah.
So I don't think we needed to add it here as well.
Yep.
I think it would be repetitive and redundant.
I do think though, well,
What you did there.
Redundant.
Yes.
not to mess up with that, but one thought would be though is if you have a kid that, what if they graduate and leave? Or,
We're not gonna, I mean, they'll get honorable discharge if they have to go to college or leave or give up or resign or whatever. We'll allow it. They can hold it.
I'm just checking.
Party, summer parties.
Feeling you out where you're at.
Well, it's like any of us, if we resign, we resign. I mean, then you go fill the position, right?
Okay, anything else?
Not on my hand.
All right, item 6E, budget.
Everyone's favorite topic. So I just want to give you an update on the budget. There's really not a lot to share because it was a zero ask budget from the city manager. So all of our operations and materials and supplies, everything was a zeroed out budget. So not much to add, not much to take away. There were a couple of items that were included that are a little bit different. We are proposing adding a park maintenance position, which would be an ad package, and was discussed with the city commission at their goals retreat. Additionally, there was a facility tech position which also is responsibility of our department. So those are both, so 2 new positions within our department working on, hopefully some of those preventative maintenance items so they don't turn into deferred maintenance items. One of the other pieces that has been a reoccurring item the last couple of years, and the commission seemed to support at our goals retreat, was the deferred maintenance funding to look at our deferred maintenance projects. We have a couple of deferred maintenance items that have been identified. One of them being asphalt replacement projects system-wide, so looking at some of our parking lots, looking at some of our walking trails, and hopefully making improvements there. DC Ladderette Park was successful in obtaining a grant this last cycle through the Oregon City Enhancement Grant project of $50,000. Additionally, they're proposing going after a grant on this next cycle for another $50,000. They were also successful in obtaining a Nike impact grant for $20,000, which would go towards court resurfacing. And so there's some additional deferred maintenance funds that the city is proposing combining with those grant funds in order to get the phase 1 project off the ground in this next biennium. So that would be, completion of phase 1, which would be the nature play elements, the ADA ramp up to the 2nd level for accessibility, as well as again, resurfacing of the basketball courts, some stormwater management and native habitat improvements on site. So it's a very exciting project, and we're hopeful that it is approved. It was, we were asked by the city manager to look at our previous funding packages for capital projects and deferred maintenance projects. We added we're slightly over on our deferred maintenance ask based on the previous historic level. So we typically had a $200,000 per year identified for deferred maintenance projects. With the DC Ladderette Park project, we kind of spread it out a little bit, and we're actually over by $170,000 for that project. So in order to fund that, that would be kind of an ad package through the city commission. So there will probably be a little bit of a discussion during the budget committee around whether or not to fund that ad package. The problem that staff ran into is that we have all of these grant funds, and once you start to mobilize construction on a site, it just makes a lot more sense to just tackle the entire project. It's more financially responsible to do it in one go as opposed to trying to phase it, especially when, in the grand scheme of things, the overall price of the improvement is not that much when you look at some of the other projects. So we're hopeful that gets picked up and that the commission is supportive. But that will be part of the conversations that the city commission has and the budget committee has during the budget meetings on, the first one coming up is on May 6th. So the last couple of budget cycles, they've been able to get through all of the content in one evening. But we do have a secondary date scheduled for May 9th, that Thursday, if for some reason they don't make it through all of the content on the first night of the budget committee. Other items that were identified, asphalt replacement projects, looking at the VFW parking lot at the promenade, and looking at doing a playground replacement project at Park Place Park. We have some engaged stakeholders around the park that would like to make improvements and go after an enhancement grant. We're proposing adding matching funds in order to accomplish the work there. And so we're hopeful that the enhancement grant goes through so that we can accomplish all of those things. I think that's all I guess I will say last couple of items we do also have as far as planning documents, as we discussed at the last meeting. We're proposing doing the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the CIP list update, and the SDC methodology update, as well as looking at the park funding conversation, anticipated expenses with surveying and public engagement. So those will also be things that will be tied into the kind of the planning end of the budget, which are kind of ad packages as well, that were discussed and approved during the goal setting process with the city commission.
Any questions?
I don't know if I ought to do it now, but I mean, we got state funding for what we call Glen Oak Park.
Yes.
Was there additional funding that the city was required to put forward that's in the budget?
Yes, so it's in the SDC budget. So the SDC budget has funds dedicated for Woods Memorial Park, as well as we have some land acquisition funds in that budget, and some planning funds. So a portion of the Parks and Rec Master Plan and SDC methodology would be paid out of the SDC funds.
So that'll begin this coming year. Or this year.
Correct, yes, yeah. And we'll have a conversation, one of the upcoming items is the SDC charges, and we can definitely get into the methodology conversation and all of that. But to your point on the Woods Memorial Park, yes, so that's coming up. We probably will have we're planning for a mid-August event on site. We'll do some site work this fall, and then we'll do a lot of the work starting late winter, early spring of next year.
Nice.
So Phil, question on the Woods Park. Has the RFPs gone out for that?
We are working on the beginning documents. We do not have the formal RFP out.
Okay.
So it is
And we have a grant that's set to expire at the end of this year?
October, and we've been in conversation with the state, and we've had a couple of grants previously that we've had to make an extension, and we're anticipating making that extension for this year. So completion by late summer, probably of 2020.
If we get the extension.
Correct.
Okay. Item 6F, we've been kind of touching on park SDCs. Is there more? Item
Oh.
Was there more?
No.
Oh, no. Item 6F, the park SDCs, we kind of
Yes.
touched on that a bit.
There we go. Park system development charges. So this was one of the items that was requested to have a presentation in one of the upcoming months. And so we're going to talk a little bit about SDCs tonight. System development charges, as a definition, it's a one-time fee imposed on new development to equitably recover the costs of expanding infrastructure capacity to serve new customers. So capacity being the key term. It can't be used on deferred maintenance or ongoing operations costs. They're collected for a specific purposes and provide a distinct benefit to the persons who pay the fee. So we identify projects that should be happening to serve the public at large, and then a percentage of that is paid out through new construction fees through the permitting process. So Oregon State legislative requirements, and so the ORS 223 has a couple of different requirements for municipalities as they determine SDCs. So some things that we have to do and that we have done through our enactment of our SDC methodology. So we have to enact an ordinance or resolution, develop a methodology. So how are we going to charge folks what that fee is for residential development, for commercial or industrial development. We need to adopt a capital improvement program plan. So a CIP list to designate capital improvements that can be funded. We need to provide credit against the amount of the SDC for the construction of certain qualified public improvements. So if somebody comes in and makes an improvement that's on our capital list that says that it's SDC eligible, then we need to be able to offer that credit to that developer. So prime example is oftentimes roadways, or usually it's in transportation or in public works realm, but the construction company will come in and build the roadway to standard, build the sidewalk to standard, build the stormwater infrastructure to standard, and then receive that SDC credit because it's on the capital list as being 100% SDC eligible. So they'll receive that credit towards them constructing that piece for the city and for the residents. Separately account for and report receipt and expenditure of SDC revenues and develop procedures for challenging expenditures. And so we have actual separate banks of money within our budget, which are for SDC specifically. And then to use SDC revenues only for capital expenditures, operations and maintenance are prohibited. So Oregon City system development charges, we collect SDCs for parks, for stormwater, for transportation, both vehicles and bike ped, as well as for water and wastewater. So as far as the parks SDC methodology, in '99 we developed our master plan document. Part of that master plan document was to create a project list of things that should be happening within our park system. And so with that, we developed our CIP list of projects that should be developed. I have copies here which I can pass out, but I would hate to take away from you being so absorbed in the presentation, so I'll hand them out at the end.
Yes, I'm wrapped.
So if you are interested in reviewing the CIP, you have copies and I'll pass them around. So we created the CIP list, we created the methodology, and then the commission adopted that in the year 2000. And then we annually on January 1, we look at the construction index and we look at the change in average market value for undeveloped land in Oregon City. And that's a 50-50 equation into how we look at making adjustments to our SDCs. So this last year, the average market value of undeveloped land in Oregon City went up slightly, but the change in construction cost indexing went up by quite a bit. And so we saw somewhere in a 9% increase in our SDCs, whereas some of the other SDCs in our system, because they weren't tied to the same indexes, did not see as healthy of gains in their SDCs. So our CIP list, which we already discussed briefly, but it's broken down. It's a little, so if you've viewed some of the CIP lists for our transportation infrastructure or some of our other utilities infrastructure, they're very specific with very specific projects. The parks SDC CIP list, it's a little bit more generic, but it calls out specific acreage for development of neighborhood parks, for acquisition development, community parks for acquisition development, regional parks, trail development, and then we also have the indoor swim pool construction for adding additional capacity as an item which is not 100% SDC eligible, so we would have to find matching funds in some form, which more than likely would require going after a public vote of bonding or some other way to acquire that type of money. It would be a rather expensive ask without getting probably bonding authority. So the CIP list has approximately $50 million in project costs, which were identified, and approximately 50% of the project would be SDC eligible. So you have some items that are listed in our CIP list which are not SDC eligible, or other items that are, again, with that capacity piece that are, it's not a full capacity build out, so it would be a percentage of maybe 2/3 not eligible and a third would be capacity building. So a typical single-family residence system development charge for somebody constructing in Oregon City would be around $29,000, of which approximately 19% would be paid to parks. So our parks SDC for a single-family resident would be around $5,600. You'll notice that the water, wastewater are both roughly the same as parks. Transportation was just readopted within this last year, and so it's they're a little bit more current. And then stormwater is one of those items that Public Works is having ongoing conversations with the City Commission, with the public around, making sure that they're keeping pace with the needs of the stormwater system. So just a regional comparison of park SDCs compared to other jurisdictions locally. So you'll see Oregon City there, just under $6,000, and the red line going across highlights that, so you can see it a little bit easier as it compares to the other jurisdictions. You know, we have some that are a little bit more expensive, like Oswego, Portland, Beaverton, and Westland, all hovering between $11,500 to $14,000 per single family residence. Some of these are, so their methodology is a little bit, some of them are a little bit different compared to others. So it's taking into consideration an approximate 2,000 square foot home, single family development when you're looking at these prices. Portland, I will point out, is one where it's a little bit cheaper to build out single family within the central part of the city, and a little bit more expensive to build out elsewhere. And so that is their elsewhere build out, around $13,000. It's around $11,000 for their non-city center SDC development. But you'll see, again, we're near the bottom third of SDCs regionally for parks. And those are the funds that you use, obviously, again, to build capacity, to build out the acquisition, to do those land banking opportunities. And, so identifying SDCs, the appropriate projects that we want to build out, that's going to need to be a priority for us as we develop our master plan document.
Yeah, but if we just stay on the slide, I presume some of the differences is just because of the cost of the housing in those areas?
No, well, I guess it would be, as an overall percentage of the house that you purchase. So yeah, you could say that. I don't know the median house price.
I guess you present it as an average value. I presume it's a percentage of the development of the house.
It is not. So it is per unit that is developed, they pay a flat rate.
Okay.
But when you're looking at that compared to the overall expense of the house in those specific areas, you might anticipate paying a premium to live in Lake Oswego or in certain parts of Portland. So if you're looking at, a lower percentage compared to the overall cost of acquiring a piece of property in Portland or in LO or Westland. So SDC revenues, they're tied directly to permits being pulled for construction. And so once you submit an application for a permit in order to build something in Oregon City, you are then required to pay your SDCs for that proposed development. And so you'll see that it ebbs and flows and depends on what type of developments we have on any given year. So if the economy is doing well and we're seeing a lot of construction, we will see SDCs coming in at higher rates. If the economy dips and we're seeing less build out, we're going to see less funds coming in for SDCs. We budget for this last biennium, we budgeted for $600,000 in SDCs anticipated coming in each year. We are just under that for the current year. That's through the end of March 2019, the most recent data. we were about just under 900,000 in the last fiscal year 2018. And then you look at the kind of that spike in 2017, that was with the Cove development, multi-unit housing. As you see those types of developments come in, you're gonna see a spike in STCs being paid out. So we're anticipating in this next budget cycle, the phase 2 and 3 of development of Cove, and we'll see some additional STCs as it relates to that development. But again, it all is dependent upon the private development, and we can't dictate how that happens. We just can try to make educated guesses on those STC funds as they come in.
Now, I have a question, Phil. Is this overall SDC revenue overall, or the revenue for parks?
Oh, good point. It is for park-specific STC revenues.
So it could be
Yeah.
much more.
Yeah.
Or the other pieces of the pie.
Yeah, so
Slices
we're
of the
about
pie.
19% of the overall, and so if, at least for a single-family residential, so if you'd imagine, yeah, this is about 20% of the overall STC budget coming in.
Okay.
These are one-time fees, right? I mean,
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so to be used on capital projects, one-time fees, so we can build it out, and that's part of the ongoing conversation with, you know, the commission, and as we're looking at our deferred maintenance backlog is, you know, we can build them, we have a nexus for acquiring funds for build out, but if we're not seeing any additional revenue coming in for operation and maintenance, we're just kind of thinning the soup, as it were, and so, you know, it's trying to strike that balance between equitably providing services for all neighborhoods, and on the flip side, being able to actually provide those services at a level that the community expects. And so, you know, adding an additional staff person is great, and we're appreciative if the budget committee and the city commission approves that through this budgetary process. But if we are at the same time, you know, building additional parks and the Willamette Falls Legacy Project comes on board, the Cove development anticipates expanding the walking paths through that area, adding North Park, which is an additional green space. These are all things that need staff time and require additional maintenance funds.
When do the monies come in? When the development is approved?
Yeah, so when they apply for their permit and the permit is approved, they're required before they're issued their permit to pay their STCs.
Is there a deadline in terms of how soon you have to spend those?
No. So it's basically a rolling account that continues. And so we have currently somewhere in the 4 million-ish range in STCs, with, again, anywhere between 600,000 and 800,000 annually on average coming in. So some of the larger projects, as we discussed previously, that will be paid out of STC funds would be the Woods Memorial Park development, property acquisition. So we're looking at trying to acquire in specific areas. Additionally, looking at possible build out. We applied for a grant for building out at Filbert Run. So if that's successful, we would match that with STC funds in order to build that out. So we have projects that are identified. Sometimes we use them, sometimes we don't. Again, we try to tie them to make the most of the STC funds because they're typically not, we typically don't have enough to fully build out and fully, so we're trying to ride that line between banking when we can and building out to provide those services for communities. And that's all I had for the presentation, so I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
Any questions?
I have one. Thank you for bringing this subject matter back and explaining it once again, and it's
Yes.
a lot to know. I remember the first time we discussed this through question and answers that it's possible that SDC monies can be used, but typically are not used for parks that were not around when SDCs were created. And all new parks were getting their operations from a general fund budget before SDCs were created, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry, I don't know that.
Yeah,
I'm not
if we bought a park before the SDCs was created for development, how did we develop those parks?
Oh, gotcha. So I haven't gone back to see, so the Oregon legislature passed SDCs in the 80s. Our first SDC methodology was done in 97 for parks. And then the updated methodology in 2000. Prior to that, I guess the funding was just general fund acquisition or through grants to acquire and build out parks. To my knowledge, we've never had a bonding authority or anything like that to acquire properties or build out properties.
So I was going to ask, obviously it's not possible under the current way the program is run, or maybe that it is, if there was a possibility for a park such as an Atkinson Park who's been in the system forever and wanted to have lighting in that park.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to happen anytime soon unless it's through a bonding kind of a vote of the people, or is SDCs a possibility for a park like that? It's not maintaining or reinventing, but it's actually an original installation.
Yeah, that is a conversation we've had internally as staff. It's difficult to make that public investment with SDCs in areas where you already have a park, where in theory, eventually you could find funds to build out, whereas if we lose the opportunity to purchase property in other areas because it's privately developed, acquired, we can never really go back to acquire that property without paying a very substantial premium to acquire that property. So we may be looking to acquire vacant land rates. But if somebody acquires the property and builds a $500,000 house on it, we would have to pay market value for that $500,000 house, when in all reality, we're just looking for the land. And so trying to right that balance between, acquisition, land banking, providing services in park deficient areas, and providing the level of service in areas that currently have parks but are not to the level that the community would expect. We have identified in this next budget some funds in order to, not a lot of funds, but some funds in order to look at some of those types of projects. And so more than likely they would be projects where we are anticipating additional funds to be brought in to support, so matching funds for grants or other areas where we could couple that with the private side in order to create the whole piece of amenity for the already existing park. So as an example, and one of the pieces that I was going to get to a little bit later in the other general business item, was that we've been approached by quite a few different stakeholder groups interested in lighting projects. So just like you're interested in at Atkinson Park, we've had Hillendale and Chapin Park, folks from the communities there that are interested in putting in pathway lighting or other lighting projects, of which they're also interested in going after enhancement grants. And so if they are successful, again, that's part of the conversation is, the comfort level of this group in us kind of shifting, to a small degree, shifting our current practice in only acquiring properties with SDCs and only developing undeveloped parks with SDCs, and instead using some funds to go towards currently existing parks, but providing additional capacity. So lighting projects would allow additional capacity through operating more effectively in the evening hours. That's obviously a capacity building project, but it's not the only capacity building project. So in order for us to expend funds in SDC, in the SDC budget, it has to, again, add capacity. It has to be on our CIP list, and that has to be approved by the city commission. And so the CIP list, as it currently sits, and again, I'll pass this out in a minute, has been approved by the city commission. It speaks to development of neighborhood parks, development of community parks. It's not super specific, so there's a little bit of a gray area where we probably could do some of these projects, but it's also something we want to be transparent in how we're using those funds and make sure that it's something that's generally supported by this body and generally supported by the city commission.
I'm kind of curious what capacity means, because the fact is Red Park hasn't been used much because it's deteriorated so bad.
Yeah.
And so can you go ahead and say, well, SDC's, I mean, it had a capacity at one time, but it no longer has that capacity.
That's a good point. So the capacity building would be, in theory, the number of people who would be served with the additional amenity, the additional capital investment. And so in theory, if we added lighting at Atkinson Park, during the winter hours between 4 and 10 when the park is open, we would have more people utilizing that park.
Do anything at Atkinson Park, more people.
That's my point. More than zero would use the park, I would agree. So that's the general way to look at it is, are you, in Portland, they did a bubble over their tennis courts at the Portland Tennis Center, and they used SDCs on a portion of that. And so that is a capacity building. It's able to be used year round as opposed to just seasonally.
And Holiday Park, Bill, you're probably familiar, SDCs were used for that, for lighting, because safety for capacity, and that was about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
It was about how much?
Pardon?
What was the last thing you said, though?
It was done about 7 years ago, and they put in LED lighting, and I know this because I'm trying to push for more SDCs to improve that park. But it is possible, but it was a hard case to make for lighting.
Yeah. So that, again, it's possible. It's just part of a broader conversation, and want to make sure that that this committee is open to those conversations. I think I put in $100,000 over the biennium to kind of kickstart that project and similar projects, and so we could do, in theory, some matching funds with some grant opportunities, if that would be supported.
So it's a commission decision yearly on how they can tweak the SDC expenditures?
The commission can, the budget committee makes a recommendation to the city commission, who then adopts the budget. The city commission sits on the budget committee, so very infrequently are there changes between the budget committee and the city commission when they adopt it, but they do have the ability to change the recommendation from the budget committee. The budget committee receives a document, basically a recommendation from the city manager, and then the city manager works with each of the department heads and their staffs to kind of put together that package. And so it's gone through a lot of different eyes, and it will be discussed at the budget committee. Either the budget committee or the city commission can go line by line through the budget and decide to move things around if they would like to. And then they ultimately vote on that. So, but in years past, we haven't seen a lot of movement in the budget. There's typically there's a broader conversation around what the goals are and what's expected, and looking at forecasting and anticipating what kind of revenues we're going to see and those types of things. So there's typically not a lot of wiggle room, but that is a possibility.
But if you're asking if we should be open to using these SDC funds to increase capacity of pre-existing parks, essentially making them better, I think that is a good idea. You know, because, I mean, if we're gonna save this money for parks of the future, yet our parks of the present are deteriorating and falling apart, then I think
Well, and
that's a
we can't-
no-brainer.
And I think I want to make sure that, so the deterioration of the current park is not something we can use SDCs for. So just to clarify, but the usability of with lighting or the usability of with certain amenities.
I think it's grammar, because, you know, I say deterioration, but that's what is creating the lack of capacity in some cases.
What about using SDCs as, I guess, can there be a co-op involved? You know, a little while ago, we had pickleball group in here, right? For the pickleball courts, and they talked about fencing and lighting and covers, and that would increase capacity. They're willing to go fundraise for that. The
Yeah.
SDCs be used to encourage that, match some funds, that kind of thing, so we use
Yeah.
their money and the SDCs and make it all work?
Exactly,
Is
yeah.
that possible to do?
So that'll be that'll be under the other general business, but I'd
Oh,
love to
okay.
talk about it now.
Well,
That's okay, because it's not on the agenda.
Well, that was just an example. I'm talking about the pickleball, but my question is,
Yeah.
can SDCs be used in conjunction with other things? I
Yes.
mean, that's just a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. And I was using pickleball just as an example because they came in.
Well, and that's the
But I guess
dollar.
that's the bubble over the tennis courts too, kind of the same idea, right?
Yeah, and the dollar amount that we currently have allocated is not enough to really substantially invest in those types of things, but in cooperation with other opportunities, you know, the pickleball group is one of a handful of groups that have come forward to ask for our approval and cooperation in developing some of these things, some of which are capacity building. So, yeah, definitely.
Any other questions? Item 6G, Waterboard Park, we can pass right over that. We've already chatted about that. Item 6H, other general business.
Oh, perfect. So as I was saying, so we have a couple of groups that have come forward that are interested in applying for enhancement grants. The grant deadline is May 17th. And so over the next couple of weeks, they will be asking for staff to write letters of support for each of their grants. I know that we've had, I think I'm trying to remember now if the pickleball folks received a support or if we asked them to come back at a later time. I don't recall, but.
Saw it come back at a later time.
Okay, so they've identified that they would like to go after funding. They actually just received funding through a county grant to install bleachers and a pad for the bleachers to sit on, as well as a gate in the fence so that you can get back and forth. They're trying to program more tournaments, and they're seeing more folks come out just to play on a regular basis, and so somewhere for folks to go and set their things while they're playing, so they don't have to be on the court specifically. So they're really excited about that. I think it was somewhere in the $8,000-ish range for that, so we'll be paying very close attention to those dollar amounts. But the other thing they're interested in doing is court lighting. So with that, I told them that I was nervous to install court lighting only and not have additional pathway lighting to and from the parking lot or the entry point into the park. They are interested in, the enhancement grant has up to a $50,000 amount that you can apply for. It is a matching grant, and so there would need to be additional matching funds. The court lighting project is right around that $50,000 amount. Additional pathway lighting, they're willing to do some fundraising in order to get their project going, and they have some funds as they have done some fundraising as they've been moving forward. But I think they would be looking for the city to invest in the property as well, of which would be most likely trying to use some of those matching funds with SDCs. And so having that conversation with you all around, again, your comfort level in us utilizing those funds as best we can as a match for existing projects or projects where we can find funds that we necessarily wouldn't have access to without cooperating on projects. So that is one of them. The other couple of projects that have approached us, DC Ladderette Park, which we've already discussed. The Oregon City Youth Sports is interested in installing artificial surfacing at Wesley Lynn Park on one of the fields, just on the infield, and then on the next field and sometime in the near future, trying to look at how the field holds up and making those improvements over the next couple of years. So that would be another project. And then we have a couple of lighting projects. Well, I guess I already said the Hillendale one, but Chapin Park is also interested in doing some lighting projects at Chapin. And we have the Park Place Park folks that have expressed interest in playground improvements, walking path improvements, habitat improvements at Park Place. So those are some of the conversations and some of the grants, and sometimes we have grants that come out of left field that we don't find out about until just before the deadline. So I'm sure as the May meeting comes around, we will know definitively who has applied, and I can give you an update at that time. Are there any questions or concerns or comments?
On the pickleball subject, I remember when they made the presentation and were asking for a letter of support from this body. And I know that staff felt that there was some issues to be resolved, especially about safety and the access of, like you had mentioned just today, about the parking lot, making it from the parking lot to the lighted courts in the dark. And so they're actually in a position where they need, obviously, I don't know about obviously, but I know that you'd rather see a pathway lighting put in at the same time they get their lighting at the pickleball court. So have we been approached again about?
They approached us just recently, so they did, a few months back, they did provide an update to this group. Shortly after that, they said that they had kind of shifted and were going after this other grant for the seating improvements and things like that. And then more recently came back and said, actually, we're really excited about the lighting again. What can we do? So I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's an improvement on the courts. They've been a good group for activating the space and making sure that it's used for the appropriate purposes, which isn't always the case in a lot of our parks when you have, there's not a lot of eyes in that back corner, and I think they provide, eyes and folks using the courts for the appropriate reason. I think adding lighting in general is a good safety measure and a good, capacity building measure, especially in the winter time when it gets dark around 3-4 o'clock and our park is open until 10, and not having appropriate lighting, it makes a lot of sense to do that. So I think this is an opportunity for us to partner with a group that can do some of those fundraising efforts, and then to use our funds in a measured way in order to see kind of maximum impact.
Phil, for the lighting, is, when they're fundraising and such, do they have to meet the Parks Department guidelines in terms of what, the lighting pole is and the type, so that the electricians and the maintenance staff, that there's standardization and not having different parks having different fixtures?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So we have, we'll work with them on scope and materials, yeah.
When they presented the first time, they hadn't identified a specific source. I think we left them with, we'll be happy to give you a letter of recommendation when you know who you're asking for the money from.
Yeah.
So it's kind of pre-approved. You and Lisa can sign off on something now that they actually have a grant source.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I will say the last one, which I'll ask for probably just general support as well, is that the Friends of Mountain View Cemetery and the cemetery staff are applying for a grant for Mountain View Cemetery's Veterans Memorial area to make improvements. The grant will be to initiate design and construction documents for that area, and then to next phase go after construction funding, which may include going after an enhancement grant in the next cycle. So interested if there is support for that, for the chair to write a letter of support for that grant application. There is no match required for that grant, so it's really a win-win.
That's great.
I think I'd support that.
Okay. Unless I hear there is not support, I'll work with Lisa on having a signature.
Very good.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to member reports?
I have one more question on the general business. You sent out a questionnaire about what would be best times to tour Clackamat Park.
Oh, yes.
And do you have any status report on that? And is there any?
I've not heard back from everyone yet, but from the ones that I did hear back, we did not have a specific time where everyone was able to make it at the same time. So I can either go back to the drawing board, or I guess first off, maybe ask if you have not submitted your availability to please do that. And that way I can look and see if we have, 8 out of 9 that can make it on a
Is
specific
that in the form of a
date.
doodle poll or?
Yeah, it's a doodle poll.
I don't remember if I
Okay,
responded.
so I can send that back out and
Yeah,
please respond. And then if, again, if it's only one person who can't make it on a specific time, we can look at that, or I can send out a new doodle poll. I kind of put it around not trying to schedule on Monday or Friday evenings, as I don't know, first of the week and last of the week always seem like bad ideas to try to get those things going. And then my requirements with city commission meetings and other budget meetings and requirements are kind of lined up. So I picked ones that worked for me, but I'd be happy to dig a little deeper and do some other times. Was the 6 o'clock start time generally acceptable for the group? Okay, so I'll again send that out. Hopefully we get full responses back, and then I will probably just communicate through the email in that form.
Okay. Great. Member reports?
I have none.
Nothing.
Other than the Beaver Creek Road project, or whatever they're calling it now, which was an adventure for us that live on Glen Oak, and I'll be stuck there for hours. But we're not bitter. Oh, and Holly Lane, don't give me I don't want to leave them out of it either.
Parks.
Oh, parks, went to Waterboard, went to the museum. So, been going everywhere, checking it out.
Good. Very good.
Which museum?
Oregon Trail one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We got lots of.
The other one.
Yeah, my next one is at, I don't know if the historical.
It's a museum of the Oregon Territory.
Well, that's what I went to, in the trail one, but there's
Well,
also
there's two
the,
different ones.
No.
Yeah, the
Historical Society, I think is
Yeah,
it.
Museum of
Is the
Oregon
Museum of the Oregon Territory.
Yeah, that's what the other one's called, on Highway 99.
Oh, the MOOP?
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
well, good.
I have nothing.
Mountain View Cemetery spring cleanup is this Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. All help is welcome. Given that I didn't see anybody at Enhancement Day.
I was there.
I missed you, I am
It was
sorry.
pouring down rain.
I know, it was
like-
pouring down rain.
It was dilute. It was dilute.
We've got the city manager soaking wet, we've got the head of planning soaking wet, we have the lovely Wyatt, who is always perfectly dressed, covered in mud in his yellow slickers. It was a wonderful event. It was just really, really wet.
It's very wet.
Thinking about you. That was the weekend I got sick.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, I have a very exciting invitation from the Oregon City Parks Foundation. Here's your chance. Saturday morning, sorry, we're gonna have competition here. Saturday morning, 9 a.m., Waterboard Park, Ivy Pull. Doesn't get any better than that, right?
Breaking's better.
That's all I have.
The Greater Oregon City Watershed Council, working with the Parks and Recreation Department, had grant funding to bring in professionals to start controlling the weeds there at the Abernathy Creek Park. They've done a great job on their initial effort. The notion is that if we can hit this a couple more times before the fall, maybe in the spring, that we'll be able to get some plantings to survive. So they've done their first job. They've done a great job. And the other thing was that our event that we had was at Ogden Middle School. However, it was with their junior ROTC, and we did that on the 20th rather than on the enhancement day itself. We did a major cleanup there.
I did the enhancement day, lots of arc dust, lots of sore days. And then explored Waterboard Park, had no idea it existed.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. And went to Abernathy Creek Park as well.
Great.
Yeah, it's a little hidden gem back there.
Yeah, my son was a little scared because there's some passed out. You know, it's not that it's very big, and but it's like, and he's like pulling off. I'm like, okay, out we go. We'll get coffee at the bakery close by.
It's all about balance.
Yes.
Nothing to report.
All right. Staff reports, item 8. I think we've all seen the documents.
Yep. It's in the rec report. Newell Creek Canyon, we have had conversations with Metro, and their property team is reviewing the documents and will be reporting back to me. So we'll have more information to share later. Claremont Way property, we're anticipating closing hopefully by the end of next week.
Oh, great.
We have 30 days from about a week and a half ago. So should be closing definitely before the end of May, but within the next week or so, we're anticipating closing.
Okay, thank you. Item 9, future agenda items. Do we have any
Clackamat Park,
Clackamat Park?
I'm hoping that we're still on task to be able to get to the point where we can get a master plan done on that park.
Yeah.
And is the first step finding
We
contractor,
received
yeah.
direction from the city commission that they did not want us to go after a full master plan document at this time. So we've had conversations with the Oregon State Marine Board. They are going back to the drawing board with their hydrology study to see if there's any way to lessen the distance from the current ramp. The original recommendation was to move it around 350 feet downriver. They're looking to see if they can make it anywhere closer than that 350 feet to lessen the impact on the green space within the footprint of the park. I will, as soon as I have information to share with the Marine Board, I'll be sharing it with this group and then going back to the City Commission.
Would it be possible for our group to have a discussion about that particular item in Clackamat Park? You're talking about the boat ramp.
Yeah.
Would they want, or would be part of our charge, is to have an opinion on that?
You serve as an advisory role to the City Commission, so I think whatever your recommendation to them on Clackamat Park, I think would be well received in whatever form you decide to provide that. So yeah, we can definitely add that to the next meeting and talk about what information we have to date, and if it's a new recommendation from the Oregon State Marine Board, or if it's just continued conversation, however you want to approach that.
Yeah, let's have a discussion about it next time if we can.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Anything else? All right, our next meeting is Thursday, May 23rd, and that adjourns our meeting for this evening. Thank you.